Yeah, my back hurt, cause I feel the strain of all my ancestors' residual pain. Die fighting for freedom or live with these chains. The system always worked just the way it was made. I was born in a trauma, you would think that I hate it, but I'm a rough-made diamond. That's why I'm elated. We survive every storm. Thank God that we made it. And my soul still lit. How can I not be a favorite? I felt fear.
I'm Sarah Kendzior, the author of the bestsellers The View from Flyover Country and Hiding in Plain Sight, and of the book They Knew, How a Culture of Conspiracy Keeps America Complacent, out now.
And I'm Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, the film the Kremlin does not want you to see, so be sure to watch it. The song you just heard was We Can't Breathe, with music by Reina Zamel and Chief Wakil, and lyrics by Chief Wakil and Kelly Wakili. The song is featured in a short film by Miranda Winters, Rocky Romano, and Reina Zamel. Reina, who submitted this song to us, is a music producer, playback engineer, live show designer, photographer, film producer, and consultant. She's toured the world with the likes of The Lonely Island, Logic, Lana Del Rey, Dua Lipa, and more. After the touring industry shut down in 2020, Reina pursued her passion for documentary photography. She has documented over 120 protests in the Los Angeles area, and her work and efforts are featured in the short film We Can't Breathe, which was awarded Best Music Video and Audience Award at the 2021 San Luis Obispo Film Festival. Additionally, the film is the official selection at the Cleveland Film Festival and Athena Film Festival. Reina shared this statement about the song. I wrote this instrumental 2 days after news of Ahmaud Arbery's murder in May 2020. 3 weeks later, the George Floyd uprisings began in Los Angeles, and alongside my partner, I spent June 2020 photographing dozens of protests. We compiled so much footage, we decided to make a short film to serve as a time capsule for future generations. I enlisted the vocal talents of Chief Wakil and Kelly Wakili to write lyrics about Black exhaustion. There isn't a specific reason that I create. It's one of the few activities that make me feel joy and is an avenue to channel my emotions. We'll post a link to this incredible film on our Twitter page and in the show notes for this episode on our Patreon page. You can find Reina on Instagram at Ray Zamel and at Winters Rock Entertainment, and on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Ray Zemi. You can find all those links on our Patreon. Thank you so much, Reina, for your incredible talents, and thank you so much to Chief Wakil and Kelly Wakili. If you have a song that you want to submit, any kind of song that brings truth, joy, your light into the world, please share it with us. You can find the link on where to submit that on the Patreon link for this week's episode. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
And this is Gaslit Nation, a podcast covering corruption in the United States and rising autocracy around the world. We are doing a live taping right now, so it's going to get wild in here. For some reason, every time Andrea and I do a live taping, some major piece of news related to what we've been studying from the very beginning of Gaslit Nation breaks. Granted, there's been exactly 2 live tapings. This is the second one. Last time around, it was the Mar-a-Lago raid. This time around, it is the indictment of FBI traitor Charlie McGonigal. And so if you have listened to any Gaslit Nation episode over the past 5 years, including last week's episode, The Real Story of the Biden Documents, but also going all the way back to our first 3 episodes in 2018, you will hear us say that Trump and the FBI have spent decades in a mutually beneficial relationship based around streamlining organized crime and allowing organized crime to infiltrate U.S. institutions. In many of these episodes, we mentioned Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska as a key node in this transnational crime syndicate. So it came to no surprise to us when yesterday, the FBI's top counterintelligence official in the New York field office, Charlie McGonigal, was indicted for secretly working for Deripaska and facilitating Russian money laundering. McGonigal worked for the FBI from 1996 until 2018, and he follows in a long line of leading FBI officials who worked to serve the interests of the Russian mafia. And I'm just going to review these very quickly. I feel like I could give y'all a quiz and you'd pass on this. So there were FBI heads, William Sessions and Louis Freeh, in the 1990s, both of whom worked for the mafia. Directly after leaving, there was Jim Comey, who took the head of the Russian mafia, Semyon Mogilevich, off the top 10 most wanted list in the end of 2015, replaced him with a bank robber, never gave an explanation for this decision. We're going to be returning to Comey today in the circumstances of that action. And then, of course, there was Robert Mueller, former FBI head. While the Trump crime cult was, out criming for things Mueller later indicted them for example, Manafort with the 2002 indictment, but basically he let them run wild and also, did not do anything about Charlie McGonigal, who was in a position to not only work with the FBI, but monitor action at the CIA. And so, the only thing that's surprising to me is that the DOJ bothered to indict a corrupt FBI official at all, although you have to ask why it took so long and what McGonigal was up to. First, I just want to add one more quick bit of context as to the recent news. In addition to the New York-based charges, McGonigal was also indicted on separate charges in Washington, D.C. I'm just going to read a description of these charges from CBS. So, quote, in a separate case, McGonigal is also facing federal charges in the District of Columbia related to at least $225,000 in cash he allegedly received from a person with business interests in Europe and who worked for a foreign intelligence service. In that 9-count indictment, also unsealed Monday, McGonigal allegedly hid from the FBI the nature of his relationship with the former foreign security officer, who later served as a source for the Bureau in a criminal investigation involving foreign political lobbying. McGonigal purportedly had, quote, official supervisory responsibility over the lobbying cases, the Justice Department said in a release. And so there's some more history to this, but first, Andrea, I'm going to pass it over to you. I was wondering if you could explain to everybody who Oleg Deripaska is and how this case fits into the broader history of the FBI, organized crime, Trump, and the Kremlin.
Dear Lord, well, that's a lot. And I just want to give my initial human reaction as a human being experiencing history as it's happening. My first reaction to this was the meme from the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Leo DiCaprio's pointing at the TV and he's like, that's it, right? I spotted that thing that we all knew was always there, like our thing. And this was us, this was flashbacks of you and I meeting and partnering up in 2016. Because remember, like all those years that I spent focused on Ukraine, which is ground zero for the Kremlin aggression experiment that was then used on us, including the golden handcuffs of entrapping politicians with dark money, including the hacking of elections and so on and so on. And also the divide and conquering that Manafort did in creating a divisive culture wars against Ukrainians, creating fake protests, fake activist groups, including in Crimea before the Russian occupation. Manafort manufactured a fake protest in Crimea against NATO and so on and so on. So all these years that I was watching that and you were watching Uzbekistan and other places, and then you and I were like, it's very obvious what's happening with Trump. He's coming to power. He's being helped in this election through the same sort of Kremlin mafia state corruption that infiltrates post-Soviet states to keep them in Moscow's orbit. It was very obvious, like plain as day. And then you have this big New York Times story that comes out, I believe it was Halloween, saying that the FBI sees no connection between Trump and Russia. And then people like us were automatically deemed conspiracy theorists. Never mind our years of writing and researching and talking about this subject, a subject that the political journalist class, the cable news TV pundit class was not ready for at all, had no expertise in. They were trapped to their desks, they were trapped to their social climbing in their careers to try to get on television and so on and so on. And they were the ones that were at best ignoring us, at worst writing hit pieces against us and saying like, don't listen to these women, don't take them seriously, even though we were the ones risking our personal safety, getting all these weird phishing emails, getting all these death threats and sticking our necks out, like ringing the alarm on this. Everything felt like it was falling apart.
I just want to add one additional note of context there, which is that another thing that contributed to our fear at that time wasn't just our decades of experience studying the former Soviet Union, but the fact that Harry Reid had written 2 letters to the FBI, one of them in August 2016, and then a follow-up letter in October 2016, saying that Russia planned to interfere in the election to alter results, that the FBI absolutely knew this, that they were doing nothing about it, and that Comey owed the American public an explanation before they went to the polls. And he said this in an open letter. They published the letter online. The story was generally buried, but it wasn't just like our intuition. We actually had a few officials, and Reid, of course, was Senate Minority Leader at the time, stating this. And that's, a very serious charge. And unfortunately, he never completely followed up on what that meant, and then, passed away. But I just wanted to throw that in there. Now back to you.
We will get on Comey in a second because he's clearly complicit on all this, and that's needs to be highlighted for eternity. But in 2016, I'd already partnered with Agnieszka Holland for Mr. Jones. So at this time, I was already working on trying to get Mr. Jones made. And obviously, the villain of Mr. Jones is the New York Times Moscow bureau chief, who shared a byline on that big New York Times story that seemed to close the case for everyone, that there's nothing to see between Trump and Russia. The New York Times Moscow bureau chief at the time. So this was just like layers of hell for me that I was plunging into. And luckily I had you by my side to go through all that. But so it brought all of that back, which also deserving of attention is the big Alpha Bank story. There were computer scientists that in 2016 were part of a group of independent people just stepping forward, trying to ring the alarm, doing whatever they could with very little access and power that they had. And as part of that group in 2016 were these computer scientists who saw strange communications pinging going back and forth between servers in Alpha Bank linked to the Kremlin and servers within the Trump organization and other sort of entities connected to the Trump campaign. And it was sort of like what was going on. And the secret server story came out. And then, of course, the big New York Times story saying the FBI sees no connections destroyed it. It made it seem like a big laughing stock. And again, we're all a bunch of conspiracy theorists. What's really interesting is that this story deserves further scrutiny now that we know what we know about McGonigal, now that we've had our deep suspicions, our credible suspicions confirmed. We all need to go back to that secret server story now, because that is an important note in understanding how Trump potentially worked with the Kremlin to come to power. And that has been underlooked in all these years. It was largely dismissed in 2016. And then John Durham, the DOJ lackey that Trump appointed to launch an actual witch hunt against people that stepped forward to blow the whistle on connections, really weird connections between Trump and Russia. Durham went on to hit people connected to them with indictments and produced this big muddled report to basically twist their findings and how and their conclusions about these really troubling findings. So the fact that Durham prioritized the secret server story at all is another big red arrow pointing to the fact that we need to dig up this story and beat the drum on this story, because I think it's an extremely important facet to this whole crime. And so in the show notes for this episode, we link to an article looking at that, and people need to reread that to ground themselves in the reality of what went on in 2016. And the simple reality is this, that the Kremlin worked with the Trump family to bring Trump to power. I mean, the obvious smoking gun for that was Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort is in the family of Russian mafia. You know that Paul Manafort, longtime Kremlin operative who was hand to the king of Yanukovych, the Ukrainian Trump, you know that he's in the family. You know that he's in with them. How do you know that? Because Paul Manafort took $19 million from Deripaska and made it disappear. And instead of killing him, as Deripaska, a thugged out Russian oligarch has been known to do, instead of killing him, he allowed Paul Manafort to live, because Paul Manafort is within the family of the Russian mafia state, and he's more useful to them alive than dead. How does Paul Manafort go on to repay Deripaska? As we all know, he works for his longtime friend Donald Trump's presidential campaign for free, being blessed in that role by Jared and Ivanka, being in the big June 2016 Tower meeting with known Kremlin spies, with Jared in the room and Don Jr. in the room and so on and so on. And I'm bringing up all this old history to point out that, yes, this crime really did happen. Yes, it was real. Yes, it is ongoing. Yes, as we talked about in our recent Florida super special, George Santos is a mini version of Russiagate. George Santos was collecting dirty Kremlin money for a Ponzi scheme, an actual Ponzi scheme busted by the SEC in Florida that he was working for. He collected money for that Ponzi scheme from Andrew and Traitor, who was a person of interest for a time in Mueller's Russia investigation, who is a cousin of super sanctioned oligarch Viktor Vekselberg, who's close to Putin. And so what does that point to? That before he ran for Congress, George Santos was already being groomed with dirty Kremlin-linked money. And then Andrew and Traitor goes on to dump a bunch of money into his campaign for Congress. And the Republicans, including Elise Stefanik, they know all about this and they're absolutely fine with this. And so the Russiagate crime is continuing to this day. So that's what we're really stressing here, is that this isn't about 2016. It's about the utter lack of accountability for 2016 and all those crimes being allowed to continue out in the open. So back to Deripaska, who is he? Simply put, he is one of the thuggiest of the thugged out oligarchs. He's the guy that won the aluminum wars in the car bomb 1990s, where there's an actual body count. He owns a bunch of massive businesses. He's not as polished as a Roman Abramovich, who really cleaned up his act and how he presents himself to be accepted into high society in the UK. Deripaska is in high society in the UK as well, but he's not a very polished guy. He's a bit too dirty for the US. And so he's been trying relentlessly for years to try to break into the US. And he's just too dirty for the US. He's perfectly fine for the UK and the Tories in the UK and so on. And he's got a lot of politicians on payroll there, but he was not acceptable enough for us. And the poor guy, like a 16-year-old desperate to get in like Studio 54 back in the day, has been like trying with the US.
I mean, 2016 is the year that doesn't end. It's the year that was not resolved. It's the year where, the people who got into power continue to plot coups and try to destroy not only our democracy, but others, in part because, of course, Trump's ability as president was to pardon everybody who had, been in this crime cult, including Manafort, Stone, Bannon, etc. I do want to kind of contextualize McGonigal with 2016 in particular, with, October 2016, because there's really interesting timing here. And, one of the questions we always ask on Gaslit Nation is who knew what and when, and who did they tell? Did they let it be publicly known? Were they transparent? Was there an opportunity for accountability? That was not taken. And yes, but there's some, crazy shit, even by 2016 standards, happening in October and in early November. So just to review that, McGonigal is the announcement that he's hired comes on October 4th, 2016, but he then starts working there at the end. And this is when the FBI began a series of strange actions that I actually wrote about in real time. I published an article in the Globe and Mail on November 3rd called Trump's Strategy, Pull the Fringes into the Center and Mainstream Extremism. This seems to be up without the paywall. I also tweeted out some excerpts, so get it while you can. Anyway, there are some things happening that we all remember well. Comey announcing that he had reopened the investigation into Clinton's emails and then taking that back, but not until many people had voted. And that, of course, Comey's actions had influenced their vote against Clinton. But then there were smaller, stranger actions. The FBI had a Twitter account called FBI Vault. And all of a sudden, this account, which had been dormant for a long time, just starts tweeting out all these files about investigations of the Clintons, along with files about the Trump family, portraying them as noble philanthropists. And again, this is coming from an official FBI account. This is before people's knowledge of the FBI's relationship with the Russian mafia, with the Kremlin, was widely known. I mean, it should have been. These relationships weren't exactly hidden, but it was not widely known. So people were, looking at this and really thinking, that the Clintons represented a type of criminality. I'm not sure they really bought that the Trumps were these, noble good doers, but mostly people were like, whoa, this is very openly, overtly partisan. Then there's a second thing that happened. that a lot of folks blew off, which was that a former State Department official named Steve Pieczenik made a video. This video is still up, in which he said that the FBI was involved in what he called a, quote, counter coup. According to Pieczenik, the Clintons had committed the original coup of worming their way into office, I guess, beforehand, and then, running again. But the FBI had taken care of everything. The FBI had prevented, any possibility that Clinton would win this election. And, he's known as a conspiracy theorist. He's known as a kook. He's also somebody deeply tied to people at the highest level of government, particularly in the Republican Party. So I took this somewhat seriously. And when I was watching all this action online, I thought, this is what it looks like in other countries when the national security services are plotting a coup. So it was kind of jarring to see Pieczenik in this video. I wrote about that both in the Globe and Mail article and in Hiding in Plain Sight. And so, developments that stemmed from that were the Comey change. And then, of course, the New York Times hyping that investigation to no end while burying others. I just want to read the report that was released on McGonigal in October 2016 to kind of give you a sense of his background. This comes from the FBI itself. Charlie McGonigal named special agent in charge of the counterintelligence division for the New York field office. And then it goes on to say, FBI Director James B. Comey has named Charlie McGonigal as the special agent in charge of the counterintelligence division of the New York field office. Mr. McGonigal most recently served as the section chief of the cyber counterintelligence coordination section at FBI headquarters. Well, that's very interesting. That kind of brings to mind WikiLeaks and a lot of and Cambridge Analytica and a lot of nefarious action involving cybersecurity and hacking, and of course what Andrea just mentioned about Alpha Bank to mind. So that's an interesting little background there. Mr. McGonigal entered on duty with the FBI in 1996. This is still the press release. He was first assigned to the New York field office, where he worked Russian foreign counterintelligence and organized crime matters. And I'm jumping in again because what the fuck? It's like this guy is like rolled up in a package to wreak havoc for the Trump camp. Like this is a guy who is deeply immersed in all of the areas that they relied upon to rise to power through illicit means. And of course, we know that while he was, quote, working Russian foreign counterintelligence, he was working with Russian intelligence, with oligarchs that were deeply tied to the Kremlin, such as Deripaska. Then it goes on to say, during his tenure in New York, Mr. McGonigal worked on the TWA Flight 800 investigation, was assigned to the task force investigating Wenho Lee, investigated the 1998 terrorist bombings of the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya, and investigated the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. Now, if I talk after every single one of these things, the show is never going to end, but I'm just going to say there is a deep and poorly studied relationship between Felix Sater, a mafioso that worked for Trump in the company Bayrock, and who is also deeply tied to the Russian mafia, to Semyon Mogilevich in particular. Mogilevich himself and Al-Qaeda. The Russian mafia was in a relationship with Al-Qaeda, trading weapons, money, etc. In the years before the 9/11 attacks. Sater claims to have been aware of this and informed the FBI. And we, of course, know about the difficulties that the FBI and the CIA had in, I don't want to say even anticipating the events, because some did. They just told George W. Bush and he couldn't care less. But, we've gone into this before with Garland's mentor, Jamie Garely, creating a kind of division between the agencies, making it difficult to share information, thus leading to the attacks being able to be pulled off. Now, it's very unnerving to me that this guy, that McGonigal, is somebody who was involved in these investigations of the 1998 Al-Qaeda bombings and also of 9/11. So I'll just leave it at that for now. Then it says, following the terrorist attacks on 9/11, Mr. McGonigal was assigned to an investigative response squad, which focused on pending international terrorist threats in the New York City area. And then from there, it just goes on about how he worked in different divisions, worked in counter espionage. So I guess he just stared at a mirror all day long. And then, ends by saying Mr. McGonigal will assume this new role at the end of October. And so, that's the kicker there, is that they were saving him. I think Charlie McGonigal was the October surprise, or one of their October surprises. He was equipped to pull this off. He was deeply attached to a key figure, to Deripaska, in this operation, who of course was attached to Manafort and Trump, and so on and so forth. So this is just another piece of the puzzle, another bit of proof that this was a deliberate operation. It was not just a perfect storm that just happened to the United States and swept us away. This was planned well in advance. And Andrea, you have thoughts on all that?
Well, that brings us to Comey, doesn't it?
It does.
Let's talk about novelist Comey. I mean, thank God I guess we should be happy that he's living out his years now writing novels. I don't know if you saw this.
I did not see. I thought his novel was a higher loyalty because it's so full of bullshit that it shouldn't suffice as nonfiction. My publisher is shrieking right now. But go on.
So, I mean, I guess I'm happy that Comey decided to become a novelist instead of joining the rotating door of corruption following Louis Freeh and William Sessions, former FBI directors who became lawyers for the Russian mafia. So I guess we should be happy that Comey's scratching his artistic itch. But he wasn't just incompetent. He wasn't just misogynistic. There are all these horrific stories of women who were in the FBI Academy who felt discriminated against. And when they took their stories to Comey, he just piled on with the misogyny. And of course, he's going to attack someone like Hillary Clinton and break protocol, as he did in July 2016, in holding a press conference, which created a bunch of headlines helping Trump, saying that, FBI Director Comey chooses not to charge Hillary for her emails. Remember the emails? He does find that what she and her team did was extremely careless. And obviously the screaming dog whistle, misogynistic dog whistle of that is that you cannot trust this woman, the first woman, God help us, to be the president of the United States. And when Comey did that, he was very much amplifying that he would be an easy mark to work with any of the proud misogynists that make up the Russian mafia. Russia under Putin, the prevailing cultural norms being like deeply xenophobic, misogynistic, and racist, and proudly so. That's why they're like financially and materialistically, ideologically aligned with Trumpism, the whole Trump movement. It's deeper than just good old-fashioned misogyny. It's also, we saw Comey taking the head of the Russian mafia, the brainy Don Mogilevich, off the FBI 10 most wanted list in December 2015. And then 1 year later, you have a Russian asset elected to be president of the United States. That was willfully done by Comey. And the excuse given at the time was that Mogilevich was in Russia, and Russia doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. So, of course, take him off. But why would that stop us? You want to keep him on the 10 most wanted list. So you send a strong message to him. So you send a strong message to your agents. Do whatever it takes to get this guy, track him, follow him. If he leaves Russia, grab him. And that's important because Robert Mueller, back in 2011, when he was FBI director, as we've talked about on this show, he gave a powerful speech, which is essentially the Cliff Notes of Gaslit Nation, saying how the Russian mafia, the mafia of the 21st century, it's a bunch of blood money Western political operatives like Paul Manafort that go around pollinating corruption. It's the fancy law firms, the fancy accounting firms, the fancy PR firms. And that's what it is today. It's just money laundering, corruption, real estate, all of it. And the face of this global octopus is Mogilevich. And he's going to be on the FBI 10 most wanted list until he is caught. Instead, Comey takes him off. And not only that, when the FBI knew that Russian hackers were inside the systems of the DNC, which is a 21st century version of Watergate, it's a break-in, just like Watergate was a break-in. The FBI agents were basically just calling up an intern, calling up the front desk of the DNC. They should have had all of their agents show up en masse saying, we need to talk to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, her executives, her everybody right now in a room. They should have had like a massive show of force to shut all of that down instead of being Keystone Cops. So what I'm saying is, as we say, they hide crimes behind scandal. They also hide their crimes, but oops, just a little misogyny. That's all it was. It wasn't. So Comey is 100% complicit in this. And we all knew this in 2016, 2017, that you could not trust the New York FBI. Even in 2015, we knew this. There was that whole story of Preet Bharara back in the day when he busted a ring of Russian intelligence recruiting local college girls to spy for them, sort of like a honeypot, like a Maria Butina, right? Maria Butina was a cute college girl that Russian intelligence had infiltrating the Republican Party, even getting in a romantic relationship with a Republican, singing Disney songs with him. And you can see this poor sap in the video, like really is convinced that this cute girl is like in love with him. So Preet Bharara busted a ring of Maria Butina's working with Russian intelligence here in New York City. And around this time, we had a big event in the Ukrainian Museum of New York City with Michael Weiss, Moaz Mustafa, who we had on the show, both Michael and Moaz we had on the show. Moaz represents the Syrian revolution, and myself and a filmmaker that had just returned from Ukraine named Damian Kolody, who had a bunch of video interviews with Ukrainian soldiers in the military hospital talking about their eyewitness accounts of fighting Russian soldiers. This was significant because at the time, Russia was hiding behind their propaganda that they were not invading Ukraine back in 2014, 2015. And the Western press was falling for it by calling the Russian invasion of Ukraine Russian-backed proxies, Russian-backed mercenaries, a civil war. That's disinformation. Russia's invasion began in 2014. And so we had this big event drawing attention to this. It was sort of like a lot of heavy hitters, standing room only, packed. And it was promoted on the Huffington Post. And the whole message was like, how do we get through to Susan Rice? How do we get through to Obama to wake them up, to give the support to Ukraine that it desperately needs back then in 2015? The support it's finally getting now, it needed back then to stop this war. And to send a strong message of accountability to Putin that would have contained his aggression, that could have potentially stopped what he did to us in 2016 with Trump. Anyway, so at this event, you had a young college girl that was buzzing around us. Like she was like staying with us when everybody else left and it was just the speakers. She was hanging around. And she got Michael Weiss's phone number. Then she came to me and she said, I have a plan on how to end the war in Ukraine quickly and bring prosperity to Ukraine. Who do you have that you can connect me to talk about my plan? At first, I'm like, oh, that's pretty ambitious. And so I asked her, do you know so-and-so from Hromadska TV? Hromadska being like the core of Ukraine's revolution. She's like, no, what's Hromadska TV? And I'm like, oh, do you know so-and-so from Euromaidan Press, Euromaidan PR? She's like, no, what's that? And you're telling me, young college girl with the Russian accent who looks Russian, who I'm assuming is Russian, you don't know any of sort of the powerhouses of Ukraine's resistance against corruption and against the Russian invasion. You don't know any of these things. And I leaned over to Michael Weiss across the bar and I said, hey, Michael, that girl you just gave your phone number to, she has no idea what Hromadska TV is. And Michael, because he studies Russian intelligence, knew exactly what I was talking about. So I had to grab her cell phone, pretend to be drunk and put my own cell phone in it and delete his number and give the phone back. And so I got her name, I wrote it down, I Googled it, and I found a Google profile of her with that looked like straight out of the Americans, just like hair pulled back, like gray collared shirt, a description of her saying, I like coffee and beaches. Like, so you know how they are. It's like they don't need to put much effort into it. And the idiots forgot the girl's original name in her Google page account. It was in the URL. So I Googled that, a totally different name, not just like a changed last name because she got married, but an entirely different name in the Google headline. And I found all of in the Google URL, and I found all of these anti-Ukrainian comments that she had left on Wall Street Journal and other places. So that's how Russian intelligence would have found her and recruited her. And so I collected all the information, and I've never done this before because I don't really know to trust the feds. I've studied enough about American history to know not to trust the FBI. I just thought, hey, Preet Bharara just busted a Russian spy ring using these young college girls. And we had this really weird young Russian college girl sniffing around, trying to collect intel, trying to map us. And so I called the New York FBI and I talked to some guy with some thick New York accent who was like treating me like I was calling in a UFO sighting. He's like, nah, that's nothing. Nah, that's nothing. I'm like, well, can I email it to you? Don't you want to say, nah. And so, but I still emailed it to some like general like email account that I found and I never heard back. And this was like late, like spring 2015 or so. So that was like one story I've had with the New York FBI. We always knew they were bad news. We always knew they were infiltrated. We saw what they were doing in 2016. We saw Giuliani, who one of his claims to fame was pushing out the Italian mafia to make room for the Russian mafia. And he was gleeful on TV saying, like, we have something up our sleeves. We're going to get Hillary. And then they did.
And I think he's got a surprise or two that you're going to hear about in the next 2 days.
Right.
I mean, I'm talking about some pretty big surprise.
Oh, yeah, I heard you say that this morning. What do you mean?
You'll see.
Stay tuned.
We're not going to go down, and we're certainly not going to stop fighting. We got a couple things up our sleeve that should turn this around.
And they created that whole thing that Comey fell for willfully. I don't think Comey fell for it.
He was in on it.
He was in on it.
He was a hired hand.
Mm-hmm. And during this time, I have a friend in the Russian opposition who had to get political asylum here, who was always telling me, like, watch out for the New York FBI. One of their translators is Russian intelligence.
And is that the translator?
I assume it is. I mean, he's always saying there's a translator embedded with the New York FBI.
That might have been another indictee yesterday. Yes, Sergei Shestakov, a former Russian diplomat and translator. He was arrested along with McGonigal in New York on the sanctions and money laundering violations. So maybe that is who you heard about all the way back in 2016.
And what's really interesting, so Comey letting one of the 10 most wanted Russian mafia boss, Mogilevich, off the 10 most wanted list, letting him go. He's back. Mogilevich is back. Last April, when we took a break from my maternity leave, we missed this story. We didn't talk about it. Mogilevich is back on being massively wanted by the FBI in April 2022.
Oh, no, I saw that. Their little announcement on Twitter. That's as much as they did. They were like, oh, look who we found again. We've realized they existed. And then people are like, oh, good. They're cracking down. And I was like, really? Let's see a year from now. So here we are, nearly a year from now, and Mogilevich roams free. And,
he roams free, but why he is so important, why Deripaska is so important, is because these guys, Putin's oligarchs, Putin's wallets, that go around pollinating his corruption, running all of these illicit industries. The corruption is an industry, prostitution, human trafficking, war profiteering, all of it. They're also the Russian military industrial complex. Deripaska has companies that are manufacturing, producing for the Russian army. So maybe that is in part why we're finally seeing a reaction to them. We're finally seeing like somebody like McGonigal getting caught. Deripaska, for instance, under Trump in 2020, he flew his girlfriend to Los Angeles to give birth to their child. He had her set up in an apartment in Beverly Hills with 5 nannies and a housekeeper. And they tried the same thing again under Biden and got stopped. And then the girlfriend and Deripaska got sanctioned. The lawyers that helped them do this were indicted and so on. And so we're seeing sort of a big pushback that I think it's fair to say is in result to the war. Russia's massive invasion. Like we're at war. Like we have no choice but to finally do something. The U.S. did not want this war. The U.S. in fact was trying to pull out of Afghanistan quickly and pivot towards China and figure out some strong policy to counter China. The last thing they wanted was to have to prop up Ukraine in a war. And in fact, they were trying to train Ukraine for guerrilla warfare because they expected Ukraine to fall. And when Ukraine didn't, when Zelensky refused to flee the country, and when Ukrainians started winning the hearts and minds of the world with all of these viral videos and these viral statements of defiance, the U.S. had no choice but to defend Ukraine and get all the allies together and strengthen NATO. And it's been this big push ever since. And as a result, you're seeing sort of more clamping down on Putin's oligarchs who are essential to the war effort. Now, the UK is falling short on this. What you have right now, Prigozhin, who is one of the nastiest of the oligarchs. He, of course, runs Wagner Group, who is the private military force, which is named after Wagner, Hitler's favorite composer, for a reason, because these are actual Nazis that we're fighting against. I mean, Russia invaded Ukraine at 4 a.m., just like the Nazis did. Like when the invasion was launched, the Ukrainians were like, oh my God, this is what Hitler did to us. And now Putin's doing it to us. And one of the forces they're invading with is Wagner. And Prigozhin has just brought a case against a fantastic journalist that we all know, especially if you've been listening to the show for a long time, Elliot Higgins of Bellingcat, in trying to go after him and all these other things. And he's so far being allowed to do it in the UK. So that's part of the problem. Is like you still have all of these pig troughs of corruption that these oligarchs are feeding on in the US and the UK, and we just have to put a stop to it. I've got a million things to say about this. I feel like I could just keep going, but you just need to.
I just want to break. We'll go back and forth. We'll do Russia corruption and U.S. corruption because, yeah, in the U.K., we saw this with their libel rulings, these attempts to suppress information about Kremlin operations, about Russian mafia activity that they did to Carol Cadwalder, they did to Catherine Belton. I just want to know, as we've always said on this show, these operations go hand in hand. And Trump's election, as Andrea once said, was a merger of the Russian mafia in the West and the Russian mafia in the East. And there's another key figure in our government who I think we need to introduce to this discussion, and that's Mitch McConnell, who is in a business partnership, or at least a relationship, with Deripaska. He has had Deripaska investing in aluminum plants in Kentucky, despite Deripaska being sanctioned by the U.S. government. And then here's where things get interesting. So you've got McGonigal hired while he's working illegally with Deripaska in 2016. In 2017, the Trump administration has their kayfabe WWE feud with Comey, fires him. People mistakenly think Comey is a hero, but then, of course, it brings up the question of who's going to be the new director of the FBI. And Mitch McConnell had a suggestion. Mitch McConnell wanted Merrick Garland to be the head of the FBI, and Mitch McConnell asked Trump to appoint Merrick Garland. Why did Mitch McConnell want this? Well, he thought that Garland was somebody who could keep the FBI's secrets, including this illicit relationship with the Kremlin, with organized crime, and with figures like Deripaska. At least that is my assumption. That's what logic dictates here. Of course, Trump rejected this idea and instead appointed Christopher Wray, who is another corrupt FBI lackey. He went on to allow an attempted coup, allow a violent attack on the Capitol. None of the organizers of that have been accountable because of two people, Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray, both of whom remain in the Biden administration. Biden, of course, then appointed Garland as AG and did not fire Wray. He left him there, despite this absolutely horrifying, tenure. And so, folks need to ask some questions about why Joe Biden has the exact people that McConnell and others in the GOP wanted holding the most powerful criminal justice positions in the United States. And, maybe that explains why Biden is always going on about how great Mitch McConnell is, reaching across the aisle to people who slap democracy in the face. I don't know. It's an interesting story.
What's weird is that when Biden first comes in, he does what we ask him to do in one of our early tapings of 2021. He declares the Kremlin a national security threat. Then he launches this big old task force against transnational organized crime. But we haven't really heard much about that. And this whole investigation in the FBI was coming out of Los Angeles and other places far removed from the New York office, which is tainted, as we've said. It's like Giuliani's, it's an extension of Giuliani, basically. And as a result, as we keep saying, the crimes keep happening without accountability. For instance, in 2016, Trump, Manafort, Russiagate. In 2020, you had Giuliani being the Manafort because Manafort was in prison. He was making friends in prison.
In prison,
still criming in prison. But Giuliani was working with Russian intelligence in Ukraine, including a guy named Derkach. Who is Derkach close to? Mogilevich, the brainy Don. So, and you know what I mean? It's sort of like, what the fuck, man? Just get them, because they're trying to have their babies here. They're trying to get U.S. citizenship for their kids. They want to entrench themselves here. They're polluting our politics by donating to both parties. They're all over New York, donating, as I think you pointed out, Blavatnik's donating to useless Jay Jacobs. That's holding the Democratic Party back here, which has national implications. The path to winning the House goes through New York State. We cannot win the House. We cannot win the House seats we desperately need in New York State if Jay Jacobs remains the leader of the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, he's entrenched in that position in part because of all of these big corporate genocidal donors, including Blavatnik, who has been linked to the Kremlin, but you're not allowed to say that because then he'll sue you and all that.
And linked notably to both Deripaska and to Vexelberg. So if you're hearing about either of those, Blavatnik is a U.S. citizen, and he's the proxy. He's the proxy for the sanctioned oligarchs that can't donate to all these campaigns. And he's giving to both sides, often in record amounts, record recently for the Democrats and a record for Kevin McCarthy, who then went on to become House Speaker.
Yeah, and so if this sounds like a stream of consciousness gaslit nation, it's because Sarah and I have been living and breathing this. And I think as folks have said to us that our show helps them feel sane, it's called Gaslit Nation because we point out the gaslighting. Well, seeing a guy like McGonigal getting taken down, that was a feeling of like, yes, we've known all this time. We've known all this time. And I did get a rush of feeling, oh, I feel sane. We weren't just crazy. Like all the people that try to label us as crazy, like here we are. I don't know, man. I don't know where we go from here. I think there's this horrible sense that they will not get Trump. They absolutely will not get Trump. Trump will take them down with him if they actually do it, because he's so entrenched. He knows these guys. He's collected the compromise himself on all of them. So Trump's protected. So instead of taking down Trump, they're going to get idiot criminals, the low-hanging fruits, the Michael Flynn's among them. And that is a guy like McGonigal.
Yeah, I mean, Flynn would be that would be meaningful, but McGonigal, he was another hired hand and not an organizer. But I think the point you make that is impossible for them to take down Trump without taking down themselves in the process. That's been the explanation for this the entire time, is that the New York FBI is complicit. And for them to tell the truth about the 2016 election or about a number of things that have happened since, they implicate themselves, not just in negligence, but in active corruption and active complicity. And I just want to make one final point on McGonigal specifically. If you're wondering what he did after he retired from the FBI, which was in 2018, of course he went and worked for a company that Jared Kushner was involved in the sale of nuclear material. That is Brookfield Property. So this traitor, armed with an arsenal of classified intelligence, worked for Brookfield. Scholar Tamsin Shaw had a thread about this. I'll just read the first tweet of it. It said, just explaining what this is. Kushner arranged the sale of U.S. nuclear company Westinghouse to Brookfield Business Partners. Another Brookfield subsidiary, Brookfield Property Partners, bailed him out of his 666 Fifth Avenue deal. Both are registered in Bermuda, and their ownership is opaque. And then she goes on to describe how this ended up, multitude of financial relationships emerged from this, including funding separatists in eastern Ukraine, which is, of course, what Manafort's stock and trade was. So we're back to that again. But my point is that they waited, and they did not arrest him early. They did not get him out of the FBI when he was doing God knows what. They did not get him after, when he was working for a Kushner venue. And so the repercussions of that for national security, for sovereignty, are severe. The repercussions of waiting for any of these people are severe. You cannot sit there and say, oh, I'm going to get the little guys and get the big fish, which is one of those, cloying mantras that we hear uttered on Twitter by these, DOJ cheerleader troll bots. It's incredibly dangerous. This is a dangerous individual. He's low-hanging fruit, but the fruit is rotten, and the American government has been, stuffing it down our throats for about, a decade or more. And so it's disgraceful. It's absolutely disgraceful that it took this long.
Yeah, don't expect anything from Merrick Garland. And let this also shed light on why January 6th, which was a coup being planned out in the open, we even announced a special for it in advance, was allowed to happen. Enough FBI agents were either sympathetic to the Trump cause, the white supremacist violence, and beating down the left, and or they were paid or working under someone who was paid to look the other way. I know McGonigal is like a sacrificial lamb, right, of the transnational crime syndicate, but there's plenty more of him where that came from.
Yeah. My back hurt, cause I feel the strain of all my ancestors' residual pain. Die fighting for freedom or live with these chains. The system always worked just the way it was made. I was born in a trauma, you would think that I hate it, but I'm a rough-made diamond. That's why I'm elated. We survive every storm, thank God that we made it. And my soul still lit, how can I not be a favorite? I felt fear and grief. Time to turn those tables and kill the big bad giant, but I don't claim to be David. They say we live in the matrix, either kill or be killed. Dirty deals under tables, I know how Hillary feel. They go from million man marching to Molotov tossing. Peace is the offering, but we feel exhausted. This for the 6 feet in the coffins. Repair what you broke or we get the sparking. It's a sickness in the air, but we still here. Fist in the air, 12 throwing cans, eyes full of tears. But fuck it, we don't really care. Make the revolution viral and make them all aware, yeah. Make them understand that we here. Are we speaking loud enough? Do you give a fuck? Listen up. We can tear this whole thing down if we have to. Don't you make us want a better life for the next generation, yeah. Listen up.
Why I'm walking around pissed. I feel the anger of my mama's mama, cause she fought for this shit. Same story, I guess it wasn't red. Brothers dying, systems lying, while we lying on the pavement red. I swear to God that I hate it, and brothers still getting lynched. Don't matter how far I made it, if all they see is this black, magnificent, obsessed with my pigment. Message deeper than the pig, I pray I'm making a difference, amen.
Make them understand that we here. Are we speaking loud enough? Do you give a fuck? Listen up. We can tear this whole thing down if we have to. Don't you make us want a better life for the next generation, yeah. Listen up. So far, we will not fail. Our time is now to break these chains, these chains. We came so far, we will not fail. Our time is now to break these chains, these chains. We came so far, we will not fail. Our time is now to break these chains, these chains. We holla, give us free, give us peace. Get these shackles off my feet. Unlock this leash. Animals, they often treat us. Mock and beat us. Ain't shit changed, it's all repeated. We all depleted of energy, envied by enemies. Cause some way, somehow, we are not defeated. Kick us down, shit. We get back up. We scarred but regal. My black people, royalty straight from Africa. Call it land of the prequel. That's where it started, regardless of what they teach ya. Fast forward to king's speeches. Slaves sang songs of better days. We still dreaming. Slavery abolished, failed to acknowledge they still scheming. Still losing brothers, lovers, and fathers. We still screaming. Sisters and mothers and little daughters turn hashtags. The pain I feel from niggas hanging still, I get flashbacks. Y'all quiet when we hung up in trees, but aiming fire when we hurt and sick and tired, screaming fuck the police. Make them understand that we here. Make them understand. Are we speaking loud enough? Do you give a fuck? Listen up. We can tear this whole thing down if we have to. Don't you make us want a better life for the next generation, yeah. Listen up.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up on our Patreon at the Truth Teller level or higher.
We want to encourage you to donate to your local food bank, which is experiencing a spike in demand. We also encourage you to donate to Oil Change International, an advocacy group supported with the generous donation from the Greta Thunberg Foundation that exposes the true cost of fossil fuels and facilitates the ongoing transition to clean energy.
We encourage you to help support Ukraine by donating to Rosin for Ukraine at rosinforukraine.org. We also encourage you to donate to the International Rescue Committee, a humanitarian relief organization helping refugees from Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan. Donate at rescue.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going.
Our production manager is Nicholas Torres, and our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Carlin Daigle.
Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle.
Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smith of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish.
Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Bootsy Tootsies,
Chick Quinn,
Lily Wachowski,
Sean Rubin,
Todd S. Perlstein,
Kenny Main,
John Schoenthaler,
Ellen McGirt,
Joel Ferran,
Larry Gusson,
Erica Moore,
Karen A. Deal,
Nico Phillips,
Brian E. Castor,
Tatjana Birch,
Karen Heisler,
Ann Bertino,
Chris Bravo,
John Millett,
David East,
Stu,
Ida,
Ben Wheaton,
Joseph Mara Jr.,
Julie Matthews,
Meganopolis,
Mark,
Barbara Kittredge,
Kevin Womack,
Sean Berg,
Kristen Custer,
Tracy Ash,
Ty Gillis,
Sharon Hattrick,
William Barry Reeves,
Emmy,
Kevin Gannon,
Mike Christensen,
Sandra Collins,
Katie Masuris,
Emily Benning,
James D. Leonard,
Carol Goldstad,
Michael Wooldridge,
Jason Banky,
Marcus J. Trent,
Joe Darcy,
Ann Marshall,
Jeremy Lewis,
Joel Newman,
Trigve,
D.L. Singfield,
Matt Perez,
Nicole Spear,
Brian Tejuden,
Abby Rode,
Jans Alstrup Rasmussen,
Z.W.,
Kathy Kavanaugh,
Sarah Gray,
Diana Gallagher,
Jennifer Ann Luter,
John Ripley,
Ethan Mann,
Leah Campbell,
Lynn Schneider,
Jared Lombardo,
Karen Humphreys,
and Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.